about this O.B. Curtis water treatment plant in Jackson, Mississippi, because there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. And I think it's going to be helpful long term to go piece by piece and unpack every little detail. Firstly, we don't know yet what actually led to the water pressure not being able to supply over 150,000 plus residents in the capital city of Jackson, Mississippi. We still don't know. I mean, the water crest, and we know that structurally there was deficiencies with the pumps, with the infrastructure. But we don't know the central cause as of yet. And yet still, I found it strange that people were pointing fingers at me. You had the governor, Governor Reeves, who just got elected in 2020. So he's kind of new to his job. He didn't invite the mayor of Jackson to his press conference. Mayor Lamboda. He's kind of new too. He's only been on the job for 6 years. You're telling me that a catastrophe happens in the capital city, the U.S. governor hold a news conference to inform the state and the nation what's going on, and you do a slight to the mayor in your own state. As they would say, something smells rotten in Denmark. That got me to thinking that there's a lot to this story. Now, I heard a resident, this came out of a resident's mouth who's living currently in Jackson, Mississippi. She said she moved to Jackson, Mississippi in 1991. So those of you who are mathematically challenged, that's 31 years ago. And she said something interesting. She said when she moved to Jackson, Mississippi in 1991, that the water system in Jackson was bad then. That it smelled like chlorine. And that she didn't drink it. Now that's 1991. Think about that. 31 years ago. It predates the current governor and the current mayor. So why was there so much hostility and animosity between the two individuals? It seems like the governor wanted to blame the mayor for a situation that he even admitted in his own press conference has been occurring for decades in the state of Mississippi. So let's unpack that, because that's something where there's unanimous agreement from the mayor of Jackson, Mayor Lumumba, to the governor, Governor Reeves of Mississippi. They both say that this issue at OB Curtis Water Plant Treatment Facility has been occurring for decades, 30, 40, 50 years. Now, the only conclusion I can draw from this, that a problem that everyone knows is decades in the making, but hadn't gotten fixed until a catastrophe arrived on the doorsteps of Jackson, Mississippi. The only logical, valid conclusion I can draw from this is gross and severe neglect of the residents of Jackson, Mississippi. Now, for those of you who don't know the textbook definition of neglect, it means to fail something on purpose. A failure to care for something purposefully. Now, something else that Mayor Lumumba and Governor Reeves agree on is that they both knew about the OB Curtis Water Plant Treatment Facility needing severe structural repairs. A year ago, at minimum, they both, Governor Reeves mentioned it in 2021. And Mayor Lumumba showed the emails that he seen with his maintenance transcripts, all the repairs and costs that were needed at the treatment facility. So this was known in 2021 that it was deficient, not up to par. Parts were needing to be replaced. That's important only because last year, the state of Mississippi had a surplus revenue of $1 billion. $1 billion. I'm trying to do the Austin Powers thing. It's just not working out. But that's a lot of money. Now, can you guess how much Jackson, Mississippi received their portion out of that $1 billion? Remember, Jackson, Mississippi, for reference, is the capital of Mississippi. 150,000 plus residents live there. It's 82% African American, 16% white American. Out of $1 billion in surplus revenue that Mississippi made last year, Jackson, Mississippi received zero. Zilch. So nothing for the roads, nothing for the schools, nothing for the hospitals, nothing for the EMT, firefighters, law enforcement, nothing for youth, substance abuse, nothing for the seniors. But we only hear about the whole B. Curtis water treatment facility. Because components and parts that everyone knew needed to be replaced were not given or paid for. We're not hearing about the bad roads, the crumbling and deficient schools. We're not hearing about how the air conditioners in the schools in Jackson, Mississippi utilize water. And because there's no pressure, they can't even turn on the ACs in the school. As hot as it gets in Mississippi. So you can't have kids sitting in a classroom that's an inferno. That is called neglect. And I know some of you think I'm going to make this political. Only in the sense that Mississippi has been managed by Democrats and Republicans. But the one true constant that remained the same has been Jackson has been neglected. Sure, Jackson used to receive some grants here and there, pennies on the dollar. But even that stopped too. It was like it was neglect and animosity. Like, we want you to starve out. We want you to be under board advisories and receive bottled water. You shouldn't have the expectation to have clean drinking water in Jackson, Mississippi. That's neglect. And that's nothing new for the residents of Jackson, Mississippi, and African Americans in the South in general. It's time to be honest and frank. You can go to a lot of different areas across this country. And one similarity that you'll find is that impoverished communities tend to be majority black, and they're underfunded. Infrastructure is decrepit, and the residents are used to dealing with sordid conditions in their communities. You know, this would have been a time when the governor, who's a Republican, and the mayor in Jackson, who's a progressive Democrat, this would have been the time to let bygones be bygones. Set aside politics and really get the job done for Jackson. Something that hasn't been done in Mississippi. Instead, we got and received finger pointing. And it started with the governor. And the mayor said, wait a minute. If you're going to blame me and kind of slight and throw the residents of Jackson, Mississippi under the bus for a situation where we have been under-resourced forever, well, I'm going to respond to that. And the mayor did, and he had every right to do so. And I listened to the mayor. And whilst I didn't disagree with very much of what he was saying, I will say this. I think if he wasn't getting what he needed from the state, he should have directly demanded it from the federal government. Now that's easier said than done because the way our system works. The federal government sends money to the states. The states allocate it to the municipalities. How much each municipality gets is according to the state. And that's what the governor does. So last year when those maintenance requests were sent in, I believe in March of 2021, apparently it wasn't submitted in the proper form that the state would have wanted it to be submitted in. But they didn't tell Jackson, Mississippi this. They didn't say anything. And now, after the catastrophe that's occurred, now they come out and tell Jackson, you didn't submit it the correct way. Sounds like excuse making. For neglect. Remember, neglect is failure to care for something. And I think the whole state of Mississippi has neglected Jackson. And it's my belief and my assumption, based off of what I know about this country, that neglect was done purposefully. They didn't care. The governor said that, one of the issues with Jackson has been billing issues. Apparently, billing has been sporadic in Jackson. Well, I could sort of understand why that might be the case. When you know that 1/3 of your residents in Jackson are considered below the poverty line, according to the United States Census Bureau. When you have a situation where last February, Jackson residents were without clean drinking water for 7 weeks. When you have a situation where you've had rolling blackouts in water distribution for decades, Who would want to pay for that type of service? I most certainly would not. I'd be like, no, I'm not paying this month. I had no water for 7 weeks. Why should I be billed for this cycle? And if that happens often, you're going to have a lot of community members who say, I'm not paying for a service I'm not receiving. So that whole dig about, well, billing issues have plagued Jackson, Mississippi. I thought, one, that was very insensitive to blame the community for a structural issue that the state has known about for decades but failed to fix. I thought that was very careless and cruel to do that to the residents by the governor. There are some good guys and gals and people in this story, and I want to shout them out. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, did a superb job. The National Guard did a superb job. The Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA, did a superb job. They came in and managed a crisis decades old in the making in a week. FEMA was keen on handing out hand sanitizers, which is very smart, because you want to make sure that sanitary conditions remain up to par when you don't have any fresh running water. So that was very smart, strategic, and thoughtful on FEMA's part. The opposite of what Mississippi has been doing, the state, in neglecting Jackson. FEMA came in and prioritized the residents of Jackson. The EPA has been giving Jackson, Mississippi tremendously good recommendations. They told them to join the Rural Water Alliance. They told them to sign up for mutual aid. These are all programs long established that you would think a state who knows their capital city is struggling would recommend. But no, the federal government, the government that gets criticized the most by conservatives, has been more helpful to the residents in the community of Jackson, Mississippi than the state has ever been. In 1 week, the federal government has done more for Jackson residents than the entire state of Mississippi has done in a century. Let that sink in a moment, because that's a huge thing to say, but it's true. You know, I said in February, we did a bunch of rallies in major cities. We didn't go to Jackson, Mississippi, but we started in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we said the only way to really repair this nation is to do reparations. Jackson, Mississippi is a textbook example of just why reparations is needed in this country. When you have residents of Jackson who the vast majority do not even have $1,000, when you have people who have suffered generational poverty in this country, from the transatlantic slave to present day, that's a real problem for a nation that says it's a developed and first world nation. Did you see the pictures of the O.B. Curtis water treatment plant facility? It looked like something out of a 1930 horror movie. It looks old and stale from the outside. I can only imagine the infrastructure inside of there, the pumps, how old and decrepit they were. And the mayor said something really keen that I picked up on. He said when the O.B. Curtis water plant treatment facility was built, initially there were issues and problems with the structure. So you have a plant that had problems upon construction that hasn't been repaired since. And yet, the residents of Jackson, Mississippi are supposed to pay and have been paying for that type of service. Do we think that that's fair as citizens of this country? That our own fellow citizens have been treated in such horrid manner? No. We know it's not fair. Conservatives love to say life is not fair. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Now, one for being quick and retortful. I say that's complete bullshit. You can't give people rotten lemons, sugar with ants in it, and hand out an advisory to boil water because it's not safe to drink. And then say you're going to have the same quality of lemonade as Simply Lemonade in the same way. It doesn't work out like that. And everyone knows it. You know, Jackson, Mississippi, the residents are probably really good people. I've never been. But they're probably hardworking. They probably are very family orientated. I would suppose many of them go to church. I would suppose many of them pay federal and state tax, if Mississippi has a state tax. And I would suppose that many of them are American citizens. But it's time to be honest. We need to say the things that need to be said. Do the things that need to be done. And fix the problems that need fixing. Jackson, Mississippi, along with a whole host of other cities in the South, on the East Coast, the Midwest, the West Coast. Anywhere you go where it's predominantly African American, there's food deserts. There's abandoned buildings. There's few to no jobs. And there's severe poverty. As Americans, we know this. As Americans, we should want to fix this. Now, not very many people have offered up solutions. And every time people do offer up solutions, a certain entity in this country comes along and tries to diminish that solution, but offers up no solution of their own. If conservatives have a better way to repair the nation without doing reparations, please let me know. I'm all ears. I don't think they do. You're not going to solve the big, huge structural issues that the residents of Jackson, Mississippi have been facing for generation after generation by not doing bold legislative things. A lot of people during the Great Migration right after the Civil War, they left Mississippi and moved out to the Midwest, to the East Coast. They wanted to be anywhere but Mississippi. You had Jim Crow. You had the Ku Klux Klan. You had the plantation owners who had just lost their property. You had the Confederacy. People moved that could move. But not everyone could move and escape it. And people have been stuck in Mississippi, facing the sheer brutality of systemic racism. You want to look and talk and see what systemic racism looks like in America. Take a trip to Jackson, Mississippi. Did you see the O.B. Curtis water treatment facility plant? It looked like something out of a 1930 horror movie. You can only imagine what the rest of the city looks like. It's a city, it's a community, and it's a people who have been severely and grossly neglected, purposefully, by the state of Mississippi due to racism, bigotry, and hatred. Period. The only way you can repair and give faith back to people is if you could do something completely different. The residents of Jackson, Mississippi, everybody's saying they deserve clean drinking water. That's the minimum. No, what they deserve is to be treated like Americans. And that hasn't been the case. Hopefully it will be soon. Look, the water plant can be repaired. It'll take some time, but it can be repaired. What about the residents of Jackson, Mississippi? Ask yourself, what restitution does Mississippi and that nation at large owe the residents of Jackson, Mississippi? The O.B. Curtis water plant treatment facility exposed something. It exposed neglect. Willful and purposeful neglect by the entire state of Mississippi. And one can argue the entire nation. It's really time that we focus on doing big things. We should want to see our citizens doing good. I don't really understand this mindset that some people have to disparage good news for their own fellow citizens.